Good morning, everyone. Today is Monday, July 8th, 2019, and here's today's Monday Morning Minute. So to start off with, we will recap last week's reading responses. I'll then discuss this week's readings, we'll preview this week's assignments, and we'll end with a few general course notes. So to start with, last week we looked at two distinct topics. The first was gender-based violence and resistance. The second was transnational feminisms. And even though these are distinct topics, it was really heartening to see so many of us make connections, critical connections, I would say, between the two to kind of look at how gender-based violence and resistance is actually part of transnational feminisms, or we can kind of recast it in a transnational light. So I pulled a few different ideas from your colleagues to share with you all. The first two on the left-hand side are reactions to our gender-based violence and resistance readings. So to start with, we have Zainab, who writes, "Women are allowed to enjoy themselves at parties. They should be able to get drunk without having to fear that someone with uncontrollable sexual desires is going to attack them. We as women should not have to worry about our dress being too short because it does not speak for us. The way we dress does not give you verbal consent to sexually harass us and strip us of our privacy." And building on this, Emily was writing and referencing here the sexual assault prevention tips reading that was in our Women in Culture textbook last week. And Emily writes, "Don't assault people. The last of Feminilly's bulleted list puts the focus back where I believe it should be. That assault is wrong, period." So kind of transitioning to thinking about transnational feminisms, Nina writes, "Women of diverse backgrounds and women across the world should not have to be considered less feminist or less liberated because of the different views they hold. Reading about the environmental justice organizations unwrapped many truths about women-specific health hazards, and not just any women, but women who are of color, women who are poor, women who are citizens of third world countries. What Zay and Valois revealed is that we can often be oblivious to the detrimental impact of capitalism on everything that concerns human lives because of the demographics of people who are affected the most." So I'm going to go ahead and pick up that capitalist thread that Nina is laying down here. I think that actually feeds into talking about this week's readings, which are about feminism, gender, and pop culture. So to start with, we might kind of ask ourselves what pop culture is, kind of how we can define it. And to that, I'll actually point you to a definition that Maythi Rojas gives in her article, Creative Expressions, in our Women in Culture textbook. And she defines popular culture as contemporary cultural expressions that carry mass market appeal because they engage the broadest audience possible. And she notes very specifically that pop culture is inextricably linked to capitalism. You can't separate the two. So those of us who I think have been angling for a feminist critique of capitalism might have a lot to sink our teeth into this week with these readings. So Maythi Rojas, who's pictured here, is actually a professor in the College of Liberal Arts. She's at Cal State Long Beach. And this article delves into the cultural work produced specifically by women of color. So she looks at how women of color tackle stereotypes head on and how they use their bodies as sources of inspiration and as sites of political inquiry. So moving on to a piece by Jane Kilbourne, who is a writer, a filmmaker, an activist. This piece is called Beauty and the Beast of Advertising. I think Kilbourne here is kind of responding to a critique that I think some of us, even in this class, might have, which is, why should we be talking about popular culture? Why does it matter when there are much more important battles to be fought? And so Kilbourne says, when we ignore popular culture, we ignore one of the most powerful educational forces in the culture, one that greatly affects our self-images, our ability to relate to each other, and effectively destroys any awareness and action that might help change that climate. So Zeisler, this is a piece by Andy Zeisler, who is the co-founder of Bitch Media, and her piece is called Pop and Circumstance. I pulled a quote that also kind of answers the question of why should we care about popular culture. She writes, "Pop culture can be social, it can be secret, it can be frivolous, but it can't be denied. The pleasure of consuming pop culture makes critiquing it one of the more challenging projects for feminists." And if we think back to one of the very first pieces that we read by Roxane Gay, in which she declares herself a bad feminist, part of the reason for that is because she says that she enjoys popular culture. She consumes popular culture that is anti-feminist, that is derogatory, that degrades women. And so Zeisler here is noting that and saying, That's what makes it difficult, but also that's what makes it important for feminists to kind of unravel and to pick apart. And then finally, we have a video link. It's a really short video. You can find this link in our week 5 modules, and it's about the Bechdel test, which is a test that is credited to the cartoonist Alison Bechdel. And it is a simple assessment of gender representation, mostly in films, also in television shows. And they say very explicitly that it's not a measure of how feminist a film is, but once again, it does tell us more about who we're seeing on screen, and kind of the extent to which we are allowed to know about the interior lives of women on the big screen. So it's, I think, a really interesting assessment for those of us who are familiar with this, as I'm sure some of us are. I think this video does a really nice job of kind of exploring it in more depth than I've seen other places. And for those of us who've never heard of this, I think it'll be really interesting for you to first of all, learn about what this test actually is, and then to start to apply it to the media that you consume. And as we work through these readings, these are all pretty short. You should be able to get through them pretty quickly. I want us to think about a couple of questions. The first of which is, what is the relationship between feminism and pop culture? I would submit to you all that it's not a simple relationship. It's not an easy relationship or one without a great deal of tension. And then secondly, how do the tools of feminism help us to critique gender representations in the media? So thinking about the toolbox that we have now amassed of different concepts, different ideas, different perspectives, how can we use that effectively to critique gender representations in popular culture? So moving on to our assignments this week, we have our final reading response that is due initially. Our initial post will be due Wednesday, and our 2 follow-up posts will be due on Friday. Please make every effort to submit your initial post by Wednesday, just so that your colleagues have time to read and respond to your writing substantively. And then again, so your 2 follow-up posts will be due on Friday. We have our reading journal check. Our final one will be due also on Friday. And then we have our major assignment, the gender infographic, also due on Friday. And I'm actually going to create a separate video that's just about the gender infographic. So please, after you've finished reading or listening to this announcement, please go ahead and check out that gender infographic announcement as well. And I forgot to mention when talking about the reading responses that we're all in different groups this week, and our groups are larger. So the idea here is just that we're still in small groups. You're still in kind of a smaller space, but you'll be able to interact with people that you haven't interacted with so far this course. And finally, just some general course notes. Please note that all work is due by July 12th, this Friday at 11:59 p.m. That is the official end of our course. And so any late work from previous weeks is also due by July 12th. And then finally, you should have received a link to fill out a course evaluation. So that would be really, really helpful both for our program and also for me personally as an instructor. I'd love to hear what you thought of this course. So again, it should take 5 minutes or less. And if you have some time this week, that would be fantastic. All right, it has been my distinct honor to teach you all this semester and to learn from you and to get to know you all. Thank you so much for your time and for your attention, and have a great week.